Hi, my name is Reese Beckley. Throughout this presentation, my fellow students and I will be discussing major changes to the Middle East as well as things that impacted Iraq and other foreign policies that we thought have been important throughout learning in this course with Dr. Marcus. We hope you enjoyed this presentation and follow along.
The partition of the Middle East. The first thing that we discussed this semester in our class was the Ottoman Empire, as well as the fall and the outcomes of the fall of the Ottoman Empire. So, just to start off, British promised bin Ali a united Arab state in return for the Arab Revolt, which did not happen because the Sykes-Picot Agreement between France and British kind of backstabbed them, because that whole agreement was to divvy up the Ottoman Empire because it fell. And because of this, the states of Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Transjordan, and Palestine were ultimately created after that agreement. So you have the Syria and Lebanon was under the French mandate as well as French occupation, and Iraq, Transjordan, and Palestine was under the British mandate as well as occupation. And after all the mandates and all of that, there was new states with arbitrary and arbitrary borders, and that was more known as Iraq. The interwar period. A few independent states existed in the Middle East at the time, Turkey and Iran. Turkey being run by Ataturk. Ataturk was really the first figure of Turkey, as well as a lot of other states and nations got a lot of their ideas from Ataturk. So most of these new nations in the Middle East during the interwar period were dominated by the mandate systems by the British and the French. And these mandates worked towards a goal of eventual independence, but with these mandates came a lot of controversy. Slide 2 of the interwar period. So, with these mandates, there were two different mandates, the French and the British, which they were trying to put their government on these new nations and states, which didn't really work because there was a lot of resistance that came with trying to push their way of government and way of living. But with these mandates, there was a rising resentment of imperial powers, and a lot of these states and nations would struggle because they really wanted their independence, but of course they had to follow the mandates. So that's where the resistance comes in because they wanted their independence.
World War II. During World War II, Britain and France tightened control over their mandates in the region due to Axis threats of oil and connections. They really wanted to keep the Axis powers from getting access to the oil in the region, and there's also the issue of connections, with Iraq being an important connection between Britain and India. And there was loyalty split in the nations of the Middle East. Some wanted to keep the support of the Allies, while some had sympathies toward the Axis. This led to the Anglo-Iraqi War in 1941, where Iraq rebelled against Britain for their independence, but Britain fought back hard, won, and occupied them till the end of the war. Turkey and Iran also had involvement in the war. Turkey joined the Allied powers in 1945, and Iran was occupied by Britain and the Soviets for oil. Post-war Middle East. Post-war brought a new age to the Middle East. The influence of the powers of Britain and France weakened in the region. Many people in the region died from the Second World War, and Iran became the center of a UN issue when the Soviets didn't want to leave their occupation of the region, and the UN forced the Soviets to leave. There was new influences from the Soviet Union and the United States as a part of the Cold War. The Hashemite monarchies of the region were weakened, and due to Zionism and the immigration of Jews to Palestine, the UN passed a resolution to partition Israel and Palestine in 1947. And when Israel tried to proclaim themselves as a nation, war broke out upon the Middle East, and it created a massive shift in the region. Age of Revolution. The loss against Israel in 1948 doomed the Hashemite monarchies of the region. Pan-Arabism and anti-imperialism as ideologies grew stronger, and there was waves of revolutions in the 1950s. The old Ottoman elite and Hashemite monarchies were replaced with new young military officers now in charge of the countries. You had people like Nasser in Egypt and Qasim in Iraq. that came to power, who were all young military officers. They brought a lot of reforms to the region, especially land reform was a big one, and economic reform was also a big one in the area. And there was a lot of diplomatic changes. There was a lot of flip-flop between loyalties to the United States and the Soviet Union and back due to the Cold War.
The next thing we talked about was the rise of Arab socialism in places like Egypt and all the land reforms that were brought about during the Nasser period. We talked about the nationalization of the Suez Canal by Nasser and Egypt gaining control over the companies that run it. The British and French and Israeli coalition that invaded and then was forced out because of US and Soviet pressure. Next, we talked about the June War, where Israel occupied Palestinian land and the Sinai Peninsula, and we continue to talk about the next conflict that ended up with Egypt crossing the Canal region and negotiating a peace with Israel in return for Sinai and recognizing Israeli independence. Next, Then we talked about the rise of Islamic organizations and influences in younger populations, such as college-age students. We talked about the Islamic Revolution, the Shia Revolution in Iran, which overthrew their monarchy.
The Iranian Revolution. So the Iranian Revolution started around 1979, and it started with a lot of oppositions and a lot of protests that also helped lead to an actual revolution. So the absolute monarchy and pro-Western attitudes of Shah had also helped lead to that revolution. And with this revolution, a lot of groups were involved. This includes the Marxists, the Freedom Movement, the Ulama, and Khomeini's group. So eventually, all of these groups are kind of gone away, and the overall winner of this is Khomeini's group. And Khomeini will actually lead and be a politician and kind of a leader until about 1989, until his death. And in the end, Islamic Republic was established with the al-Faqih, or the rule of jurist, or even the guardianship.
On this side, I will discuss the power of oil on the Middle East countries. Specifically, I'll be talking about the effect on the Arabian Peninsula. The states of the Arabian Peninsula realized that they can use oil for diplomatic exchange as well as foreign policy. This influenced the surrounding states as well as states of power. Thank you. On this slide, I will discuss Hussein in Iraq. Hussein and others used the Ba'athist Party to gain power within a revolution. Hussein gains all dictatorial powers after consolidating power. In 1991, the Gulf War started after Hussein invaded Kuwait. In 2003, the U.S. invasion overthrows this dictatorship. We would like to end our presentation by asking a couple of questions. Our first question we would like to ask is if there's anything that you saw in this presentation that you did not previously know or learn in other classes about the Middle East or Iraq. And our second question we would like to ask is if there is anything that we need to know about the Middle East or Iraq that you think is important that we should know before continuing this course, or if there's anything that you learned in one of your history classes that would be important for us to know. Thank you.